Today's tutorial is this adorable little Jack Russell puppy. It is all about puppy power today. So all you need to do is grab some wool, your needles, a mat, and one of these, and I'll see you in there and we'll get going on part one. So we're just about to get started on this gorgeous little Jack Russell, but do remember that this can be adapted for any type of dog. You can use the basic shapes as the core for many types of animals. Let's get to it. I also have a pattern to go with this. If you like working with a pattern as well as a video tutorial, then that is available on the website. It has lots of stuff going on inside, including a really good size guide and template and step-by-step photographs. That is a brilliant pattern if you enjoy working with a video tutorial and a pattern alongside it. If not, just enjoy the video tutorial. I'm going to be using carded lengths. These are long, they're called slithers sometimes, I just call them carded lengths, and I've got some different colours here. On the actual puppy here, you've got the Jack Russell puppy, there's only two colours and the black nose, but I might add some more of these in just for a little bit of highlight later. And I may do something with a reverse needle. I'm not quite sure yet. We'll see how we do for time. And you will need two felting needles. I'm using a 38 star, which is a nice good all-rounder, and then a 40 triangle, which is a finer needle for the top finishes. And then my trusty barbecue skewer. You should all, if you have been watching my videos, will see this on a regular basis. This is the secret weapon in your needle felting stash, and I highly advise you use one of these. It makes such a difference to how you needle felt, how quickly you needle felt, and how much easier it makes to get nice symmetrical shapes, especially legs, which can be a real problem for many new needle felters, getting those legs exactly the same shape and the same size and being nice and firm without any floppiness. Really important. Those are what you need tool wise. Then obviously you'll have a mat. It might be a foam mat. It's a rice field Hessian mat with a protective wool topper. Really important. This can be any fabric, cotton, wool, acrylic, blend, but that will make your mat last so much longer, and it's super important. Let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the body, because the body is what will be the scaffolding for the rest of the animal, and then we'll move on to the other elements. I'm not going to use the barbecue skewer for the body. I've got about, I don't know, carded wool here, I would say maybe 15 grams, something like that. What I'm going to do is I am just going to start rolling this up into a long barrel shape, and notice what I'm doing here. All that air is being removed because I'm pressing down on it really firmly. I've not even started felting yet with the needle because there's no need. So nice and firm, pulling in those ends as you go. And we'll get to here, and I'm going to take my coarse 38 needle and I'm going to start felting those fibres in. I'm going to turn it round and do the same on the other side. Not being too precious over the shape and the size at the moment. We're going to build up. We just really want to get a nice firm base, and with the 38 that will actually go deeper into the wool and tangle all those core fibres because they need to be firmly felted. You could do this on the barbecue skewer as well, and I have done lots of things, body shapes on the barbecue skewer, but I just thought we would do it a bit differently today, just in case you want to make something straight away and you don't have a barbecue skewer. You don't actually need a barbecue skewer, but it's super helpful. I'm keep rolling that round. Now I'm going to take my 38 again, and I'm just going to tuck these tops in. Not too much, just so they're tacked in. And then I'm going to turn it over and do the same on the other side. And then we do more of the same. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start figuring out as I go along which is going to be the neck end. And the neck end will be slightly narrower, so I'll probably go with this. So I'm just going to roll all of that round, just building up this shape. Make sure all the air is out, and diagonally in and down to narrow that neck end. It doesn't have to be too narrow, it doesn't really matter that much. Pull that really tight. Those last wisps of wool, gather those in. Don't worry about any little bits of vegetation in your wool. If we don't cover them up, you can just easily
pull them out. Be careful if you're using your needle. Don't do that with a fine needle. It will break. And just keep working around and shaping. We're not there yet, but we are getting there. I'm just working this end because this is where the head is going to sit. I'm not going to felt too much in here because I want some nice soft raw wool, which makes it easier to attach the head. And a 38 star needle, you can probably do most projects when you're starting needle felting from start to finish with just one needle. If there was 1 or 2 needles I would always say to have is the 38 star, or a 36 is a really good needle for starting with, but I quite like the 38 star. It's less robust and it kind of does everything. And then a 40 triangle or star, just a 40 gauge needle for the fine details when you finish. If you don't know what your needle sizes are, just check the ends, and if it's firmer, it's coarser. If there's more bend to it, then it's a finer needle. That's the best way just to work out what you're going to use. If you want to know about needle felting and sizes, and if you've got needles and you don't know what they are, then there is another tutorial and I will link that down below for you. I said that end was going to be the neck end. That's correct. Maybe this end's a bit narrower, so we'll probably go with this end. See, it always changes when you're needle felting. It's looking a bit egg shaped at the moment. I'm just going to give it a quick roll just to lengthen that. It's looking a bit podgy, that's better. And then now I can work on flattening the base. Now if you wanted to at this point, you don't need to, but you could use a multi-tool to speed up the process. Any of these type of tools work really well. Again, I'll put a link in the description. I've got a brilliant blog post that has all of my favourite needle felters that I've gathered over the last decade, which should be really helpful for you. So I'll pop that down there. So if you're looking for good needle felting suppliers, then they will be on the list via the link. I haven't obviously included everyone because I haven't used everyone. I can only go on my own decade of experience, but I have tried a lot and my favourites are in there. What I've done there is I've just flattened that base. Don't worry about how that looks at the moment. We may or may not tidy that up later. You can always just go over it with your fingers, but want to make sure that it's actually going to sit. Lean, and actually I quite like that lean. Maybe the lean will be good. We'll see. Again, I'm just going to lengthen it by rolling it in my hands. A little bit more felting, and then we are ready to start on the head. And I think I will use a barbecue skewer for the head because I just want to show you how easy it is to get your shapes really nice and firm and symmetrical. They're easier to shape. There we go. And then we'll come back to this later and flatten this down. We'll see what it's doing, but see, we can do that. And then you can also flatten with your fingers. Your hands are such great tools, like I say, for the rolling, to lengthen it if it's a bit podgy, because we had a bit of a tubby puppy there. And then you can just go down from the top. And can you see, whichever way you're poking, whichever way the needle's poking, it will push the wool that way. Because we want this narrow here, we push down with the needle. Hope that helps. That's a really good tip. You know, you push away from the area that you want to make smaller and shape. And then if we wanted to do the same at this end, then we would start pushing away, but we don't. We want to keep that nice and flat. There we go. There's a basic body shape done. Now we're going to shape the head, which looks quite complicated, but it's really not. It's all about just sort of building it up. You start with a really simple, it'll probably be like a really small acorn shape, and then we'll build that up, and then we can add onto the nose as well. We may even do the nose separately as a piece that we add on, but we'll see as we go. And if you're working from the pattern, you will also have the size guide. You can use that. Oh, pretty good. Yeah, we're pretty much there with that. So you can use that size guide. And if you have that, you can half the size if you copy it and half it if you want to make smaller animals. Then it just makes sure that everything else is in proportion. These are really helpful, and I do sell the templates actually on their own, so you don't have to buy the full pattern. You can just purchase the template, and they're just super cheap. They're on the website. I'll pop the links below, as I said. Onto the barbecue skewer. Ignore those black marks. That's from a previous project where I wanted to make sure that it was a certain distance, but that's a really good tip to put a little mark on if you want to. Let's get to the head. The head we're aiming to start with for an acorn shape, and I'm just going to split this carded wool down the middle because I don't want it to build up too quickly. And then all you do is you take your barbecue skewer, and because it's a nice sort of rough wood, the wool really holds onto it quite easily. And because it's around the stick and we are keeping that wool flat as we turn, we're not letting it twist, we are taking out all of the air. So I'm going to get to here, and then what I'm going to do is, again, firm needle, coarse needle, not a fine one. I can guarantee you, use a fine one on this, it hits the stick and it will break. So we're just poking in a few times, a better angle for that. Just tucking those in on the other side, and then we're going to continue. And I've not decided which is going to be the back of the head or which is going to be the front of the head yet. It will just naturally find its way. It always does when you are working with shapes like this. Generally it does. And then other times you'll have to build it up as well, depending on what you're actually doing. But you will find that one end tends to be bigger than the other. And this works for so many different heads on animals. It works for sheep, foxes, hare, your basic shape. And then from there, you develop it for the animal that you're actually creating. I'm going diagonally now because it's really firmly felted in there. And you see how quickly that builds up without too much effort at all. Probably going to have this end as the nose, but we'll see, it might change because I can see the back of the head here sort of becoming a little bit wider. Just go with whatever the wool is doing. Don't be too precious over it. There's no need. That's the joy of needle felting. Most things can be fixed. There's no tricky stitches or knitting patterns or anything complicated. Doesn't matter if you miss something here or there, it's not going to affect the overall outcome. And when you're doing this, you will think as you're doing it, and guarantee if you are new to needle felting, 100% guarantee you'll be thinking, this is never going to look the way I want it to, or it's never going to end up like that. But what you will find with needle felting is that everything kind of comes together at the end. I always say it's like a sum of all its parts. So you get all your parts together bit by bit, so you don't overwhelm yourself. That's the other thing about needle felting. It's brilliant because you just do bit by bit, and then you can leave it. And if you're having a bad needle felting day, walk away and come back to it the next day. So that's building up nicely now. Now you see how this is built up. I may end up with this is the back of the head now. But that is building up nicely. Okay, yeah. So let's just pull a little bit off and then we'll see where we're at. And then pop all those top layers in. Don't worry about all the wisps just at the moment. We'll get to those in a minute. And then can you see here, we've got this soft layer here. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring that round, because what that does is this is going to be the back of the head, and bringing all that wool into the centre gives that really nice, neat finish. And it's a bit flat now I've done that, but we will sort that out. And remember, we'll be putting ears on as well. And we can always add layers on later. But then I'll just go around diagonally, see here, and I'm taking away those flat edges. So we're getting that curve back. This is one of my most popular, when I was selling the needle felting kits, it was one of my most popular kits, but it's definitely one of my most popular patterns. It is really cute. And the great thing is, like I said, it can be adapted for any dog. I made this, it was one of my first kit designs, so it must have been 10 years ago. I've seen copies of it. I'm not surprised, just because it was so popular and it's so cute. It's unavoidable, I'm afraid. And it's just, you can't copyright a breed of dog or a shape. There's lots of things you can copyright, your patterns and what have you, but you can't really copyright animals. But if it's a specific design, then absolutely you can. See how that is really coming together. We've got this lovely round shape for the back of the head here, and then this nose is going to come along and start to take shape very soon. So we're going to start now just working a little bit more of the shape. I'm still deciding whether to add the shape on whilst it's on the skewer, or take it off and then create a separate piece, which I may well do, because I do want this head to be nice and firm. See that? Really love it. It's still squishy, but nice and firm. But don't overfelt. You can overfelt. So if it just stops, if you find that you're unable to shape it any further, then don't felt anymore, because then what will happen is it will actually become softer, because you will start to break down the fibres. So it can actually, if you really overfelt, it can become soft again, because the wool has lots of fibres that tangle in together. They interlock. Without taking it off the barbecue skewer, just a little bit of wool. And I'm just going to start here. So sort of I'm half on the face and I am half on the skewer, because we want to lengthen it. To bring that round, can you see what I'm doing there? Poke that in so we've got that attached nicely. Bring it round there, because we want it to look nice. We don't want lots of different lines. So I'm just going to pop that on again. And I'm going to shorten this bit here. I don't want too much length on it. We do need it to be nice and firm, because when we put the black or the dark wool on for the nose, we don't want it to collapse. We don't want it to end up with lots of indentations because the wool was soft. Just bring that along here again. Just pull that little bit out. We haven't over felted that. Yeah, there we go. So I'm just going to go around here, hold that on like so. Can you see how, as we've wrapped it round, it's just become part of the head? And you could have done this in one piece. I suppose you could have made it slightly longer. I do like this technique. If you're making a fox as well, if you've got a particularly long nose, it's perfect, really ideal for that. And what it also means is we can then have the head shaped. So we'll have this dip in here, and then we'll have the bigger forehead. So can you see what I'm doing now? I'm just creating a flat area there, like we have here. So that head, the back of the head, is going to lift higher. That's working really well. I hope you're enjoying the content. There's so much on the channel. I'm working late at night, so you need to be quiet. But I hear that if you hit the like and the subscribe button, they don't make much noise. So that's maybe something you could do to support my channel. Help me keep going. But it all helps. It means I can actually do this, so you can get access to all of my YouTube content, my blog content, my Felt Hub, my newsletter, for completely no pennies at all, apart from maybe having just to sit through an advert or two. Yeah, that's really shaping well now. I'm pleased with that. I'm not going to do too much more on that actually, because that looks really good. And then we've got some needle marks. So what you would then do is, with the fine needle, because this is just penetrating through the top layer, you would then go around and shape. But if you have a lot of lines, dimples, marks, or if you're a new needle felter and you're struggling really with that top layer to get it neat, just keep watching, because when I put the head onto the body, before that I'm going to show you, well, when it's on the body, I'm going to show you a really neat trick to cover up everything in one go. It's a brilliant tip and I use it a lot, so don't miss that. And then at the end, there will be one of my recommended videos popping up for you. I will also pop all the links in the description, so you can have the links for my blog, for my Facebook groups, and become part of the sort of creative community that we all love. There's lots of groups, lots of needle felters, and there's room for all of us. So I'm not shy about my recommendations there. So it was worth taking the time on that head to get that really nice shape. Can you see? And I just want to poke in this end a little bit more, because I really do want that nice and firm. I don't want to lose any of this shape when we pop on the nose. And once this is done, we will just have the legs to do, and then the ears, and then we'll be ready for assembly. And if you're watching this now, this is part 1 of this video tutorial. So part 1 is where we're making all the body parts, and then part 2 is where we will put it together, because putting it together is just as important as creating all the lovely shapes. Spent this time and effort and joy and mindfulness creating all this beautiful work, and you want to make sure that it goes together nicely, and there's some really good techniques to help you do that. So that I'm going to take off. I've got a big hole there, but that's actually going to be covered up. But I'm just going to, with my firm needle, never do this with a fine needle, it will just snap. I'll show you. You see how that's starting to wag? Yeah, that will snap. And always use the best quality needles you can afford. It is false economy. If you can get a bag of felting needles, 30 felting needles for a £5, you are just going to end up throwing them in the bin. They are not going to help you start or progress needle felting. Absolute false economy. There's some good mid-range needles, but the really cheap needles, you know, the ones that you see on the Chinese sites, they won't have any gauges. They'll just say small, medium and large. And then I've done a little video on how they differ from these quality needles. I think these are Grossbecker, so these are German needles, and these are from World of Wool, and they are the gold industry standard as far as felting needles go. And every barb is precision made, whereas with the Chinese one, they felt really badly, and you end up having a really bad needle felting experience and never going back to it again. And actually, it's not your fault, it's just that you've got the wrong needles, because not all felting needles are the same. You're going to have a very bad needle felting experience with them, and you'd be better off buying some better quality ones. And they're not that much more expensive, but if you are getting 30 needles for a £5, then that is, you know, they are cheap needles and will not be of any use to you at all. So there we go. And then what you can also do is you can roll them in your hands, and what that does is just gently, we're not elongating it, we're just smoothing it. So you get those nice smooth tops, and that nose is a nice shape. We'll be able to squish that in, you see, with our hands, so we'll have a higher forehead there, and that is our head ready. Just get my template, and that's pretty much there as well. So you don't need the template, but if you do like working with the template, or you want a size guide, then you can download that straight away from the website. Or if you want the full pattern to work along to on the tutorial, then you can do that also. Okay, legs. So 2 and 2. Basically 2 long ones, 2 short ones, because we build all of this up and attach it later. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take 2 equally sized pieces of carded wool. I need to add more, but if you start with equal amounts, and then, as I said, with this I've done here, might be a bit long for that, but if you have a barbecue skewer, what you can do is you can decide what length those legs are going to be, and then put a little mark so you know that the leg, that's the length it wants to be, and then you'll have a little bit of excess loose wool which you will keep for attaching. But again, if you're just using 2 equally pieces of wool and put a mark for how long you want them, then that should be absolutely fine. You don't need the template. It's just there if you do like working with them. All we're doing with this is we are keeping it really nice and firm. We are keeping that wool flat, and we are moving along. And then I'm going to hold it there, take my coarse needle and just felt along the edges, down the side of the wooden stick. You'll feel it with your needle. So don't go in all guns blazing, just so it's all attached. This is going to be the top of the leg, so this is going to be where it attaches, and I'm going to leave loose wool there. And so this end I'm going to felt in. This can be as firm as you like. We're going to build this end up so we've got this nice paw. And the great thing with this project is I'm doing it in a really simple way, but if you are a more advanced needle felter, then you can embellish it. You can add your own details. You can make it more complex. You can add more colouring. You could add wire to the legs if you wanted, although it's not needed with this size. There's no wire in this at all. You don't need wire for needle felting. That's another thing that people are told, oh, you have to use wire. Well, you don't. Using wire doesn't make you a better needle felter. It just makes you a needle felter that uses wire, and that's it. Nothing more than that. A few more pokes in there just to secure it before I continue. Then I'm going to work towards this end again. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to come back down. Felt that in. I'm not worrying too much about a perfect shape at the moment. Let's just get it all together. We'll work on that on the top layer. Come down, and then what we want to do is we want to have more at this foot end, so I'm just going to keep going, and that starts, oh, just take that dark out, and that starts to widen that foot, or give us more wool to make it wider at the end. And then, as you can see, we go diagonally, and we can actually start to narrow the rest of the leg. So again, it makes this even wider. But let's get this felted and really firming up the paw. And if we need to add more wool to widen it, we can do. But let's just work with what we've got. You can always add more. Much more difficult to take it off. And if you're at this point when you're felting, you can't remove wool. You've felted it on, and that's that. So you would, if you've overdone it, you'd either have to make the other leg match and have big chunky legs, or just start again. And it's worth starting again. You're learning every time you create a piece for your project. You are learning. Your techniques are improving. You haven't made mistakes. You're just learning as you go. That's so important to remember. You wouldn't expect to knit a really complicated jumper if you hadn't knitted before. So it's no different with needle felting. Why would you put those expectations on yourself? It takes all the joy out of it, and it's just so relaxing and mindful. And that's what's more important. Yes, we want a lovely end result, but let's just enjoy what we're doing. And if you think less about the end result and focus on what you're doing, then you're more likely to improve with confidence. See there, I'm just going to roll that there. I just want to lengthen that a little bit. When I do that, I'm not going to roll where the paw is. Can you see that? Because I want that to stay wide. So when you do that, you see how that is now really nice and smooth, and we've still got this nice loose bit here. Again, your hands are really, really good tools. Never forget that they are just as important as the felting needle and the wool. If you're watching the captions, then I apologise if it says wall instead of wool. It seems to be a word that it's really difficult to pick up on, and if I spent all the time going through every sentence when I mention wool, I would never get any videos out. So if it says wall, I mean wool, unless I mean wall. And I'm just going to press there. I'm going to roll. Can you see? I'm really, really putting the pressure on there. That is creating even more shape. And let's get this nice and straight here. Nice and firmly felted. What we don't want to do is when it comes off the barbecue skewer, we do not want it to unravel in the middle and become soft and bendy. There's nothing worse than floppy, saggy legs when you're needle felting. Again, I have another tutorial on that, on how to avoid those floppy, saggy legs, but I am showing you this way, which is a really good technique. And we've also got this loose wool here, so we know that when we come to attach that to the body, we've got this nice loose area here. I'm just going to roll that again, and look, you can push that up so it can make it even bigger. Again, using your hands as your tool. So I'm going to take that off. Got a little hole in the end there. So I'm just going to push the needle down the end, and that gets rid of it. And then we can just check and see if there are any loose bits, and there don't seem to be any. Then what you can do now is when you make the second one, which I'm not going to show you how to make both of them because they're exactly the same. When you make the second one, you can use this as your size guide and your shape guide so that both are pretty much equal. They don't have to be exact, but very similar. So I will make another one of those in a little while. I'm going to show you now. We're just going to do a short one. So it's going to be about half the length with a loose end, and you just grab that wool, wrap it round. Super fast. Hold it there. In fact, I'll turn that over. It's actually better to hold it that way, I think. Poke that in. This is going to be the paw. Just top that in for now. Top that in. Tack that in. Tap it in. And then let's come down the leg. Keep that really nice and firm. And then we're going at a diagonal angle. So not staying in the same place. Keep it there. Turn that over. Nice and secure. I'm just going to pull that off now. I just want to wrap that around the end there, but leave that loose because that is going to attach to the side of the body. But that will also be covered up, so I'm not too precious over that at all. In fact, most of this, that section will probably be covered up when we build up the sort of hind quarters, is it? Correct me if that's wrong. Oh, and if you want to, ask me anything in the comments. I love questions. Absolutely love questions. So feel free to ask away, and I will get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Maybe tell me what your favourite breed is. You know, do you intend to use this as a sort of a template for another dog breed? If you are interested in realistic dogs and you are a more advanced needle felter, I wouldn't advise it when you're starting because it can be quite demoralising when you're trying to do something that's, you know, you've jumped to chapter 5 and you should be on chapter 1. You know, it's not the way to start. But if you are a more advanced needle felter and you really do fancy having a go at more realistic dogs, then I can highly recommend Chick-Tin Creations Masterclass on Needle Felted Dogs book. It's fantastic. And you will also find me in the channel interviewing the wonderful Cindy Lou Thompson from Chick-Tin Creations, finding out all about her own inspirations and her own creative life. So excited. It's a great series. Lovely to be interviewing the wonderful authors of the fantastic needle felting books that we use and just finding out what inspires them. So as I did before, I'm going to add a little bit onto the end here. Let's split that again actually. That there, pop it round. So we widen that paw, then work up the leg again, just to make sure that's nice and firm. We don't want that unraveling when we take it off the barbecue skewer. Do you see what a wonderful tool this is? It should be in every needle felter's stash box, regardless of ability. What this also means as well is if you want something really firm, but you don't, you know, wire can be quite tricky to start with. If you want to create something that's really firm, then the barbecue skewer replaces the need for it. And this here, this hair, everything on here, the body, the legs, the long firm legs and the head, everything on there is created around the barbecue skewer. And when you look at it, you think that must have wire in because of the length and the proportions, but it doesn't. There's no wire in there at all. So as I said, I can't emphasize enough how it's not necessary to use wire in needle felting, and many of the best needle felters don't use wire. It's there to serve a purpose, and if your project requires the wire, then of course you use the wire. But don't, for goodness sake, start needle felting think you've got to start with wire. Please don't. Learn the basic shapes. Learn how to use a felting needle. Get used to the feel of the wool. And then later on, you can start maybe adding some wire gradually. Like in the sheep's legs, I love to add wire to the sheep's legs. Because I can get a really nice shape and I can pose them. And maybe if you wanted to create a neck, so you've got some posability. And you can just work gradually, but don't bomb so far ahead. Don't overwhelm yourself with all that stuff on Pinterest. You know, all those fantastic creatures you see. They started on chapter 1 as well, just like you. They didn't happen overnight. For some of them it took years. You can learn the basics really quickly and start making things like this really quickly, but other things will take time. There we go. That is our hind leg. Just going to poke that in there, make sure it's nice and firm, shorten it a little bit. The joy of this is because it's going to be covered up, if one ends up longer than the other, it doesn't matter because we can just pull them backwards or forwards to suit, but that looks pretty good. And then that is going to get attached like so, and then we're going to build up that hind quarter. So now what you need to do is make another one of those, another one of those, and then we will be ready for the ears. So onto the ears. As you can see, they're a really simple shape. They're almost like a petal shape or a soft sort of triangle, but I'm going to show you how easy they are to make. I'm going to do one in white and one in brown. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a small piece of white, and then at the same time I'm going to use a small piece of brown, roughly the same size. The first thing, what we want is we want nice, neat edges, and we want to do that without too much effort. So there's two ways you can do this. You can do that by folding, like so, and then you have an immediate petal shape, or you can actually draw the shape with your needle. But I'm actually going, because they're small, I'm going to go with the folding method. So just fold that in half, take this loose wool, and it needs to stay loose at the end because we're going to attach that to the head. Roll and mat that bit at the base. There, do the same with the other. I'm not even started felting, but you can see where we're going with this. So then what I'm going to do is I am now going to draw the rest of the shape like so, because what I want to do to get an immediate neat edge without any raw wool, which will save you loads of time, we pull in those edges around that line we have drawn with the needle, and immediately we've got soft edges for that ear. Take that off, don't leave it on too long. Go to the other one, do the same. If you work in tandem with these, you will find it easier to get similar sizes and shapes, and whichever one you finish first, you can use that as your template as well for the other. So again, we just pull in that wool to the edges. You'll feel that resistance, and you can see how that's coming on. Now that's a different shape, but what I'm going to do is I want them long, so because I want a little point at the end, so I'm just going to stretch that because we've hardly felted it, so we can do that. Pull that off, and you see that wool's pulling off quite well because I haven't over felted it. Then we're going to start working on the shapes. What I'm going to do at this point is you can continue, you can use two needles together to speed up the process. I often tie an elastic band around them, or 3, and that really speeds up the process. Or you can go to one of your multi-tools. Now, if you are doing lots of animals with big ears, you know, for the hair, whatever you're doing, foxes, sheep, then I highly recommend these punch tools. I have got, this is a 7 needle one. This is cheaper than the pink ones and works just as well in my opinion. I've never used it. Well, I have used the pink ones, but I've never felt the need to spend money on them. These are about half the price, and you can get these on eBay and Amazon for about a £5, I think. But they have fine needles in. So you want fine needles in, and I've just got 5 in there. I think there's one broken. And what this does is it has a guard. But what this does is it speeds up the felting process so quickly. Pull that away. You will know when it has started to really firm up and felt together really well, because when you pull it away, there'll be less wool stuck to the mat, so it will come away easier. And what we need to do is now we need to firm up this shape before we actually shape it. So we firm up the ear before we shape it. But can you see how that is beginning to come together already? It just naturally starts to form that shape. And I'm going to do the same with this one. So we can keep an eye on them both and make sure we're not losing one shape. It doesn't end up completely different to the other. Pull that off, don't overfelt. You see how that's really felting nicely. This is a sienna carded wool from World of Wool. So that's a sienna carded wool, and I think that might be a Jacob carded wool, but it's carded wool, so it's a white carded wool, natural white, and this is the sienna, which is lovely. You see now how they're really firming up. Have we got similar shapes there? That one looks a little bit bigger, but we will sort that out as we go along. So I'm just going to really firm this up, and the same with the other. Look how smooth the finish is as well when you use these punch tools. Okay, now I'm going to start shaping. So they're pretty much the same size. Let's have a look. What have we got here then? So this is what we want then. We want fine needle now. Because we firm that wool up, if we start to use a coarse needle, we're going to struggle to really get this wool to the position we want it. We're just sort of going to push it around without doing much else. But a finer needle will actually go through the wool like butter. Go around. Use finger guards if you've got them, because you are likely to poke yourself doing this, and make sure your fingers are nice and far apart, so that if you haven't got guards you can avoid pricking your fingers. Now I want more of a point here. I'm just going to bring this in a little bit with that 38, with my coarse one, and I'll go back to the finer needle, the final shaping, because that's quite loose, that wool there, so I can still use the 38. And again, still at a point where we can stretch them. I always advise as well to use a photograph as reference if you have one, because it really does help when you're looking at proportions. This is going to be our reference for the other ear. So that is looking pretty good, better than the ones that are on there actually. So on there, I'm going to lay that on top. Now you can see the difference with the shaping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that fine needle, I'm going to use this bottom one as reference. And then I'm going to show you a trick with a piece of folded cardboard, which is also another brilliant tool when you're working with little flat pieces like this. And it's quite tricky to get those edges free of wisps. You can of course trim them afterwards with scissors, but it's much nicer if you can actually get those nice and neat whilst you are working it. So how are they doing? They're almost the same. I'm not going to worry too much about that. But I've got these wisps here. Can you see? These wisps. I want to get rid of them. So here we go. Folded piece of cardboard. Put that ear in there, squish it in hard. What this also does is it protects your fingers, so be careful you don't slip down the side of the cardboard, but then you go along and you just push along gently, push all those fibres in. Can you see what I'm doing there? And that neatens up all those loose fibres, because sometimes it's not possible to get them with the scissors either. I'm not that fussed, to be honest with you. I don't mind, you know, wispy bits. It doesn't bother me. But for some people, you know, they don't like it at all. So this is a really good way of tidying up without poking your fingers and being able to hold on to it really firmly. Can you see the difference there now? See how those wisps have gone? Then you flip that ear over. I've got a little bit of a lumpy shape there as well. So I'm just going to lift that out a little bit. Go along diagonally. You do still have to be careful with your fingers here, because if you just poke down the sides, you will catch your fingers and it does hurt. You're barely poking at it. You're just really tacking in those little wisps of wool. And it's just another way to get a more professional finish, but it's a really easy technique. See, and then we can come back and just work our shape again. But if you're a beginner, don't try and overdo this. You know, just get a nice shape. So there we have our ears, our body, our head. I'm going to make another leg for each of those. And in part 2, we will put it all together. It's going to be so exciting. So please stay tuned for part 2, and we'll get on with putting it together and all the final details.